Welcome everyone to Incorruptible Mass. Today, we are so excited to talk to Jess Nahigian from Sierra Club, Massachusetts. And we really are your outlet for progressive information about what's happening in Massachusetts. We talk a lot about why things are so broken, what we could have here if we fixed it, and how you can get involved. So today is all about environmental policy and what we've been able to pass recently, how those things might be falling short, what the Sierra Club is doing to really help us reach our vision of wonderful, sustainable, beautiful future. But before we get to Jess, our main exciting guest, I am going to introduce the rest of the peanut gallery, as I like to call us. I will go ahead and start with Jordan. We want to introduce yourself?
My name is Jordan Berg-Powers. I use he, him, and I have several years' experience in progressive politics.
Thank you. And Jonathan.
Jonathan Cohn, he, him, his, joining from Boston, far too close to where the marathon was this past weekend, and have been working in electoral and kind of in advocacy politics for a number of years here in Massachusetts as well.
And I am Anna Callahan, she, her, coming at you from Medford, loving local and state politics for many years. And now I would love to introduce our fabulous guest, Jess Nahigian. Jess, would you introduce yourself and also your organization?
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate the work that you do here. Jess Nahigian, I use she and they pronouns. I'm the political director for the Sierra Club, Massachusetts, based in Cambridge, Mass. And I've been doing electoral and climate justice related organizing for several years now. Yeah.
Fantastic. Anything more about Sierra Club, Massachusetts, and exactly kind of what you guys are working on recently in the last couple of years and now?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Sierra Club, Massachusetts is the local branch of the National Sierra Club. And the organization is protecting and promoting people, the planet, and for people to enjoy the planet. And so here in Massachusetts, we advocate on a number of different policies, as well as have opportunities for our members and volunteers to get engaged, going outside and outdoors and exploring and enjoying the planet. And so as the political director, I am in charge of our legislative advocacy, as well as our electoral program. And we work to get climate champions elected and to pass climate justice policy in both the legislature and with the state administration.
Fantastic. That is a great segue to what the state has passed recently. We know that there actually was finally, after many years of not passing any environmental policy, we finally got a suite of bills passed. And I would love to hear from you sort of what that legislation was on a broad scale.
Yeah, so originally, our original Global Warming Solutions Act is sort of our foundational law here in Massachusetts addressing climate change and global warming. And that was passed in 2008. And it set a number of goals and targets to hit around reducing our emissions. And we didn't actually have a law that updated that law. Like this is the thing with issues that go on for a very long time. You can't just pass one law to deal with them. You have to keep going back and reiterating and updating. And so we finally had an update to that law that was passed in early 2021. And that is colloquially known as the Decarbonization Roadmap Bill, and it would create interim carbon emission targets for 2030, 2035, 2040, and 2045. It would also get us to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So that was sort of one piece of legislation that was passed, which is really exciting. It gives the administration, if they so choose, which the Baker administration didn't as much as the new administration will, we hope. It gives them a lot of leeway to enact policies to get us to those emissions reduction goals. We also passed a second piece of legislation this past year, in July of 2022, that would greatly increase our offshore wind capacity here in Massachusetts. Offshore wind is sort of the future of our renewable energy supply here, and so this lays the groundwork for that to happen. It would also, it's also going to help a lot with our electrifying our transportation space, specifically our electric vehicle space, which we need to be getting our vehicles off of fossil fuels and onto electricity. It passes a number of other sort of policies that all would go towards meeting that decarbonization goal.
Fantastic. We would love to hear from you how both the Sierra Club as well as the rest of the environmental community is really engaging people in the political process.
Yeah, I think, these bills that were passed have been the work of many, many people over a number of years, raising the alarm on this issue, getting it to the forefront of legislators' to-do list. And I think that it was a real concerted effort, not only to engage people outside of sort of the usual suspects, which I think is really important, but also working alongside movement partners outside of the traditional environmental space, recognizing that environmental issues cut across many other important issues, understanding where those intersections are, and working with partners to advance mutual goals.
Yeah, one of the things that I love about sort of the work that happened on this bill is I go to a lot of legislator meetings, unsurprising, I think, to anyone listening. And I would see the same, 20 people, 10 people at most of the meetings. But whenever I went to a meeting organized by either one of the environmental partners, there were always people who weren't engaged who weren't usual suspects, who weren't the same 10 people, 5 people who show up to the legislative meetings all the time, but there were new faces, people I didn't know in my own district, right, my own community, and I'm in Worcester, so it's a tiny part of Worcester, but I still was seeing a bunch of people I didn't know, and so I think one of the things I deeply admired about the work and the continued work is not only am I asked on a consistent basis to engage with my elected officials, but also the ability to bring in some of those people who otherwise they don't normally see. And that sort of helps ratchet up. Oh, people I don't know care about this, so I maybe need to care about this.
And Jonathan.
Can I quickly chime in, and I want to kind of underscore kind of the importance of the victories with the recent climate legislation here, is like how terrible our legislature has been in recent history on this issue. I was thinking of it, I believe, Jordan, was this 2015 or 2016 when like the issue of net metering was the big thing?
Yes, yeah.
They were talking about, and that the House, with 2 no votes and 1 present vote, passed a bill that was basically written by like utility and fossil fuel lobbyists to actively harm the solar industry, and that legislators afterwards wanted to get a gold star for signing onto a letter to the Senate asking the Senate, please don't do what we did. Our bill is actively harmful.
That's right. They voted on a bill that they had hours. It was a 300-page bill.
Yeah.
It got released the night before. They had to vote on it the next morning. They had a few hours to read it. If you read, I think, a page an hour, you could maybe, a page a minute, you could have maybe gotten through it, but not understand it. And a bunch of the legislators voted on it, and it not so much so that our community didn't know if it was good or bad. Like people who are professional lobbyists were trying to read it and couldn't tell you for sure because it had a few good things, but a ton of bad stuff. But because it got released in the dead of night, and then they had to vote out the next morning, people were scrambling, and so they could have said, "Hey, we need more time. We're not going to vote on it today." Instead, they said, we'll just do whatever the speaker wants, which is what happened. And then when they found out what was in it, they sent a letter saying, don't vote on the thing we just voted to pass. I voted yes on this.
Exactly.
Not knowing what's in it. But don't do what I did. which is a really bonkers position to take unless you live in Massachusetts. Like, what a weird, like you could have at least said no or present or gone behind the speaker and say, please give us more time, or asked for a delay on the floor, anything. No, they just voted yes.
Mm-hmm. November 17th, 2015. I checked on our scorecard for the date. It was 151 it was 151 to 2 with one present, because I remember Frank Smizek voted present, and I believe it was Hecht and Provost who voted no.
Yes.
But I just wanted to use that as an example of, like, it's not as though like having successful policy wins. It's just like it's always been that way. We're in liberal Massachusetts. They're like passing climate bills left and right for all of time, but that getting those victories did require a lot of organizing work to be able to move a legislature to create the pressure to move a legislature that can often not want to be moved.
So we're going to get to create the outside game of creating pressure. But before we do, I want to make sure that all of our listeners know about the amazing scorecard that Progressive Mass does that Jonathan just talked about. So you have to visit this. It is absolutely incredible. Some of the best research and most important information that you could have in electoral politics statewide. It's scorecard.progressivemass.org. Please go visit it. It's absolutely amazing.
.com.
Sorry, .com. I apologize.
No worries. And then we finally, I'll make it a quick plug and then go back to the regular schedule thing. Our legislator pages now actually have URLs with legislators' names. So if you do scorecard.progressivemass.com/legislator, first name hyphen last name for whatever legislator, you will get to their page. And that's like a improvement that I wanted for a long time. But back to the scheduled agenda.
Oh, our scheduled agenda. I really got to dive into what Jonathan was just talking about in terms of like how important it is to put pressure on people from the outside. And if I may comment, which we've said many times on this program, that a lot of organizations are afraid, they are so concerned about their inside game. And just so people understand, the inside game means that you create alliances with state reps inside the building and state senators. You try and, influence them through, meeting with them and, helping them in any way you can, providing them with information, really being helpful and friendly and working with them together, which is good work. But that a lot of groups are afraid to have an outside game. And an outside game means that you are engaging normal people who live out, like don't work inside the building, just have normal lives. And you're getting them to do things to put some pressure on the people who work inside the building, on the legislators. So Jess, I would love to hear more about your view on the inside versus the outside game, on like what sorts of things you have done in the outside game. Like just give us some information about how you guys view this.
Yeah, and I really appreciate everything that you said, and especially about groups being afraid, I think sometimes, to play the outside game, but just how absolutely necessary the outside game is. I think a lot of the outside game also comes from people power, right? Sierra Club Massachusetts, I think, plays a little bit of both, but we have 100,000 members and supporters in the Commonwealth, and that's really where we derive a lot of our power, is being able to push for change from the outside. And I think even more so than Sierra Club, I was involved in Sunrise Boston for a number of years, and we understood very clearly that our role was not to push for legislation. And in fact, we had legislators come to us and say, you are doing such exciting things, like what legislation do you want to be working on? And we sort of said, no, that's actually not what we're working on. We are really trying to raise the moral consciousness, right, of decision makers, and get more people involved in the process. And I'm not saying Sunrise Boston was solely responsible for the climate legislation that passed, but I think along with a lot of other movement partners, that put that kind of pressure on the legislature as well. I think, it moved climate up to, a must do on the to-do list of legislators. And at that point, legislators can then go to people who are playing the inside game, which is important, right? Because they need people to talk to say, and here's the legislation that to make those people go away, here's the legislation that you should pass.
Yeah, and I just want to say just again how exciting it was, how great all of the actions. I would love it if you could talk a little bit more about some of the creativity that came out of just allowing young people to not be pigeonholed by like what's the details of this bill, but rather really focused on conscious raising, on allowing people to speak their minds, to speak up. I always say this to people all the time because legislators want to put their jobs onto you. And I'm just like, that's not my job. That's your job. That's totally the right attitude to have. My job is not to figure out a law. That's like your job. That's literally what you get paid for. My job is to get you to understand this issue. This big issue is important. You have to figure out how to tackle it. So first, bravo for that. But I would love to talk about some of the creativity, because some of the things I think we think about, again, when we think about this work of pushing legislation, we just think like making speeches. And actually, no, there's a lot of creative things we can and should be doing to sort of push forward our issues.
Yeah, and I think sometimes in the, giving speeches part of the work, we also get sort of dragged down a little bit. It's not fun, right? And I think that this work should be fun. It should be joyful. I think one of the things I loved about Sunrise is that, it really makes being joyful like a tenement of the actual movement itself, because climate change in particular is such such a depressing sometimes like debilitating topic to even think about. And so making it fun and engaging, I mean, some people will just join you because they want to have fun. Maybe they care about the issue, but they're there to have fun first and foremost.
Yeah, I just think, and so I think the important thing about this is you bring in, one of the things that Jess is here as a part of Sierra Club, and one of the ways you get great people in these organizations is you allow outside people to agitate, to do the work outside. Not everybody wants to show up and meet with their legislator. You did that for a living, and I barely wanted to do it. So like, and I got paid for it, right? Like, so it's not, it really is not something that has to be, if that's the only thing we're asking our volunteers to do, our regular people to do, we will only get the same 50 people to show up because that's a particular thing. And we're missing all the artists, all the comedians, all the musicians, all the people who actually move real people, right? People are moved by art. They're moved by music. They're moved by laughing. They're moved by things they see on TV and on TikTok and on Instagram, right? Like those are the things. They're moved by memes, right? These are the things that move people. And so if we just focus on the State House, we miss all the creativity, all the energy that young people have, that other people have. And those people become our activists. They become our great people doing the both inside outside work eventually, right? Like you miss all of that energy if you're just focused on the State House as the sole means of moving legislation. And it becomes harder to move it, right? Like it's harder to just do the inside. But when you have outside pressure and you're the sensible source inside saying like, look, we're just here to help you out, like, that becomes easier to say I'm helping you out when there's other people at the gates being like, you got to do something. So one of the other pieces I love about some of the work that the environmental community has done, again, is just unusual bedfellows. So one of the perceptions, I think, of the environmental movement is that it's incredibly white and that it's not responsive. And one of the things that I am, if you ask me like what's something that excites you and most proud of the work in Massachusetts, it has to be the work in Massachusetts around broadening the environmental work to be truly representative of all the folks and all the people engaged in the state. And one of the things I've seen in my time sort of working in this community is the growth of these allegiances across sort of like groups that don't necessarily work on the environment, but see environmental work and environmental justice and climate change as a part of their economic work, their social justice work, because obviously they're linked. And so you see a lot of groups like Neighbor to Neighbor list environmental justice and climate change as their important issues. There's this broad coalition of people, of groups of color, and this movement being led by people of color. You're seeing then that broadens out, and again, that strengthens the work that we're trying to do in terms of inside, outside, and really pushing legislation. So you have, for example, Community Labor United, which is just a group of labor organizations and community organizations, largely people of color organizations, coming together to think of so that we can't be divided around the environment, because they often try to divide us, saying like, no, you can't have clean air or you can't have safe buildings because we need to build. And so you're sort of putting jobs and working people against us, and we're saying no, we're going to be together. And that work has been led by people, like literally their executive directors have been people of color, right? So again, thinking about sort of centering those lived experiences, and so what you get out of that broad movement is not just the creativity, not just legislation in the face of people who are doing bad things in not so recent past, but you also get a really strong environmental justice bill. An environmental justice work comes out of that, and we have legislation on it. And I think it mirrors what we saw in polling, which is that people who are most likely to list themselves as environmentalists was actually the Latinx community. And that was, I think, surprising to some, but as a person of color, our lived experiences, and there's a myriad of different reasons for those lived experiences, but all of them lead themselves to understanding the sort of intricacies of our problems, the things we face, the things that our families have faced, and the environment and climate change and the real lived experiences of climate change. So, everything from, smog to asthma rates to immigration, forced immigration from climate change. There's just a ton of issues that come up that our lived experiences center on. And that's why it's so important that we have these broad groups, that we have environmental justice work, that we sort of put these things together. And I think it really speaks to, again, the success that we've had in Massachusetts, particularly around the environment, is having the sort of building out unusual suspects.
Absolutely. I would love to, Jess, to ask you if there's anything specific about these bills that you think we don't know yet, to give us some more details, but then talk a little bit about how are we falling short? Are we falling short in the implementation? Are the bills themselves not far enough? Like, what else do we need in order to really fulfill the vision and the dreams that all of us, everyone, I'm sure, who's listening to this podcast shares?
Can we actually start off too with Jess? I think you might have had something on EJ as well that you wanted to say. Oh,
yes, please.
Oh yeah, and I can tie them in. So I think we do. There's been some really great moments for the environmental justice community. I think especially with this new administration, creating a new position of Undersecretary of Environmental Justice and Equity. Yes. Is extremely exciting, and the fact that it's someone, Maria Belén Power, who comes from the environmental justice movement in Massachusetts, is also exciting. And I'll say, I think there's a long way to go, whether it's on air quality monitoring, making sure that we're taking into full account cumulative impacts, not just one project, but the fact that one project may pass muster, but there are 5 projects that pass muster, and together, when they're all next to each other, they're polluting communities, and siting and making sure that our energy infrastructure is sited in a way that is just. I think we have a long ways to go with implementation. And with that, I'll sort of transition into where we're falling short, because I think that is one area where we're definitely falling short. The other area I think is we have a lot of plans. We've passed legislation, we've created a lot of plans, and so now the question is, how do we actually implement the plans, right? And we're starting to get into the weeds of implementation, and there's going to be a lot more both legislation and policy, et cetera, over the next, I mean, even like 10 years, right? We're just going to have to continue to, assess what's happened, what's needed, what needs to change. I mean, this is like a huge transition of our economy, that we're talking about. And so, it starts, I think, with, starting to put some of those plans directly into action. And the number one thing I would say is we need to stop building new fossil fuel infrastructure. If we are going to
Amen.
reduce our emissions, we have to stop expanding our gas system in Massachusetts. So
every time you build something, it's got to be there for 20, 30 years just for them to make enough. I mean, it's crazy when we build new ones.
It's such a clear example of a kind of a lock-in effect. It's something that I think of when it comes to the pipeline expansion as well as in a discussion of prison expansion, is you build things to use them. And if you don't want to be using them for decades to come at the capacity that you're building, you don't build them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. I mean,
exactly.
I think, can you talk a little bit also, I'd love, because we're missing, I think, we set out really good plans in 2008, and I don't believe under Charlie Baker, we didn't hit a single mark. Like we went through our goals, if I recall correctly.
Wait, one quick thing on the gas moratorium before then going to that. Jess, the Sierra Club and other organizations are encouraging people to do something about that. What can people do about the push for a moratorium on gas pipeline expansion?
Yeah, thank you for that setup, John. So yes, we are, and part of this comes out of environmental justice fight that is happening out in Western Massachusetts. They're trying to build a pipeline out in Springfield and Longmeadow, and there are a couple other projects that are being proposed. And so the administration has the power to say, no, you know what, we're going to stop okaying these projects moving forward. And so we're calling on the administration to declare that there is no future for gas, that we're putting gas in the past, and that we are putting a moratorium on these expansion projects until we have a plan for a just transition. And so people can send a message to the governor asking her to do this. And I think it's bit.ly / gas in the past. Yeah, that's how people can take action. And you'll see more on that soon.
And can you talk a little bit about sort of, in terms of falling short, how, I think the other piece I believe is, again, just that we're missing our marks, like that we did set out important goals in 2008, and that under Charlie Baker, because he was just not serious about implementation, that we've been missing our sort of implementation goals.
Yeah, and I do want to say, I think the Baker administration met the 2020 goal. There was a goal, and they met it because we had a global pandemic
right,
that greatly decreased our emissions for a very specific period of time. So they got really lucky with that one. And even then they just barely met it. So yeah, we have a long way to go, and we have a lot of plans telling us that we have a long way to go. So I think implementation here is key. There's some, like I said, some things that just make sense, like stop expanding, gas infrastructure. Other things are, we have to directly transition over to electricity in all parts of our lives, because electricity can be generated with renewable energy. And so the more things run on it, the better off we are. And so buildings, I think, is a huge area where, the state understands, I think, what it needs to do, but we really don't have a plan to transition our buildings over to electricity at the speed and scale that's needed. And I think that that's actually, excuse me, that's actually a detriment to the state, because it's not only an opportunity to reduce our emissions, but it's also an opportunity to grow our economy.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in quick, this is like a particular thing for me because I was living in Somerville for a bunch of years where it's 2/3 renters, and now I live in Medford where it's 50% renters. And you need landlords. You have to have landlords willing to upgrade their buildings and pay for that. And like there's appears to be just no ability and no real thinking about how to ensure that landlords are going to do this work. Obviously the renters want it and need it. It's going to reduce their heating costs. But I lived in a place where there was like a full door that would not close, inch open all winter long. Be crazy.
I mean, just talking about the sort of problems with implementation of these things. For example, I live in a 3-decker. I own the 3-decker. I got solar panels, and I legally cannot provide that solar power to my 2nd floor and 3rd floor tenants. There is a legal ban on that. Just in terms of to your point about landlords and implementation,
yeah,
you know, we are in the process of trying to electrify our building, and we have to take into account our tenants because we can't provide solar to them. So that's an unfair burden based on maybe costs and other things. So we're constantly trying to both decarbon our place, but we are constantly put in because of rules that are in place to protect National Grid and Eversource and not the environment. We can't do really like just common sense things. And so you know, that's part of the problem, is that even people like myself who want to do the right thing, we're barred from doing it. You know, there's like a maybe way we could go into some agreement with our 2nd floor, but no one could tell us how we would do that. And when we tried to ask about it, everyone's like, no one's done it. And so it was just like, what is this? Like, this should not be this difficult for somebody who does this to navigate it. Imagine if you're just a regular person and you wanted to navigate it, or you're my next door neighbor who, you know, you're 87 or 80, I think she's 88 years old, and you know, her English is limited. Like, how is she going to provide it? To her 3-decker.
Jordan, when you were talking about Worcester and talking about the usual suspects who show up, I was like, Jordan is like the usual suspect. He's like that guy. And Jordan cannot make it happen. I mean,
yeah. Right. That's right. I have been unable to make it happen, even though I'm the guy. Right. Yeah, it's really difficult. So I just think it's, you know, this is again to just point, like, we have these plans, but we really need to get serious about how are we making it easy to implement. You know, solar is a good example. Solar in communities, in renting communities, is really difficult and it doesn't make sense the way it should and could make sense.
The one thing I wanted to chime in with, and I'll pose a related question on this to Jess, is when I looked recently at the kind of state's Clean Heat Commission final report from, I think it was last year or the year prior. And they noted that to actually meet the existing climate goals that the state has, that we would need to kind of retrofit an additional 500,000 residential homes and roughly 300 million square feet of commercial buildings by 2030, with a pace of, was it like 20,000 to 25,000 home installations per year until 2025, and then 80,000 a year, and then going up to 100,000 a year afterwards. And so that it shows that, like, that's what would need to happen if we were to meet the goals that we have, and the state is not yet doing what it needs to do to meet its existing goals. What I was thinking of, and this builds off that, Jess, and would love to hear your thoughts on this, is there's always that kind of engagement with people that leads up to when legislation gets passed. And it's often very difficult for like a regular person to follow what comes after, because it's so easy to think that, well, this is now passed, this is solved, that legislation kind of becomes fully embodied and enacted and et cetera, just simply on its own. But would love to hear some more of like what's going on in terms of keeping tabs on that implementation, on engaging people in that, knowing that the implementation does take a lot of work, and being able to make sure that people are paying attention is important for keeping even a well-meaning administration on climate stuff accountable to goals against like backsliding and inertia.
Yeah. Well, it always helps to have things in statute. People are a
Mhm.
lot more afraid of things that are in statute. So
Can you explain that
cementing it,
for our listeners?
sorry?
What does that mean for our listeners to have things
Yeah,
in
so
statute?
basically what that means is,
Mhm.
oftentimes laws say that something should happen, and then the state government figures out sort of how to make it happen. If that how to make it happen is in the law, it makes the government a lot more accountable to doing it, because there's just more, it's legally they're more culpable if they're not able to meet it. So passing laws is important, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But in addition to that, like, there are, administrative, there's advocacy that can be done to the administration. I think a lot of it, though, a lot of where the change actually happens is at the local level, in people's communities. And I think being, looking at what is your town doing on climate, it is a really good question to ask. And I'm just gonna shamelessly plug this. We have a website, Mass Towns for Climate .com, which we have, I think, over 200 municipalities documented now of the actions that they've taken and other actions that they can take. The state, in trying to implement these laws, the state offers a lot of programs, does a lot of to municipalities so that they can actually make these things a reality. And I think folks should check to see, what is your local government doing? What are the barriers? And if there are barriers, to be communicating those back to legislators and to the administration, because they need to hear that, if a town can't get something done, they need to hear why, because we need to make it possible for that to happen.
Yeah. I want to just quick remind people of an unfortunate reality, which is every time scientists come out with a new report, what they say is, oh, the thing we said 20 years ago, actually we were wrong. It's worse than we thought. And every time your legislature passes a bill and they say we're going to do X by 2030, it's not 2030, it's 2035 or it's 2040 before it actually happens. So the problem is, with both of these things happening at the same time, we are not in place to reach the goals we have to reach. And with climate, we have to face those two realities. And we are,
there's a cascading effect, right? Like the more that we don't take it seriously and react, the more that then the problem gets worse quicker. and then it's cascading, right? And it's cascading in ways that we didn't predict, because we shouldn't be in the place we are. Right? Like, we're just like, oh, I didn't know that other thing was then going to cause this other thing to go wrong. And the reason it's going wrong is because we've allowed it to get this bad. Right? Like, I think, I think that's part of the problem. So it is the thing. I just to underscore, if we haven't said it clearly enough, if you ask me like what gets me most frustrated, it's like we don't take climate seriously enough. Like, we don't, like, what we are facing down is far more serious than you, if you're listening to this, believe. Like, whatever you think is going to happen with climate change, it's worse. It's gonna be worse. And the things that we just sort of have, like the fact that it was 80 and now it's 50 degrees and there's wind, like, we aren't accounting for that in a real way. The like fact that things are going to blow a lot more because we're varying degree, like, or just, little things like, I was on the Conservation Commission. There's a lot of things with water flow. There has, even the standards we set 100 years, those all have been in a carbon creating environment. We have been pumping carbon into the world. There's a reason that Carter had solar panels in the 70s, right? Like, we have known this problem for some time. And even with that reality, we are still unprepared for how water is going to affect our lives, not water rising. Like, the flooding, we're seeing those things, that's all going to get so much worse. 100-year floods are happening all, nearly yearly. Like, we are just really messing in ways that we don't have to, and that cascades other problems that are unforeseen, right? Like it's like if you've ever been in a house and then something goes wrong and then like five other things go wrong, or your car, right? Like something goes wrong and then five other things, your car goes wrong. That's what's happening with the environment. And we're just like, oh, well, we'll just fix that thing that was going to cost $50 to fix 3 years ago. And you're like, but other things have gone wrong since then. And now we have to catch up to that. And so I just want to, if you like take anything away going into this Earth Day, I want you to take this in the thing. It is a real problem. And whatever you're doing or whatever you think is happening or however serious you think, it's just not serious enough. You're not taking it seriously enough. Because this is a real problem.
And don't forget, you can really be joyful in this work.
Yes.
You can really, I don't want people to get too depressed, right? Like this, that was a depressing segment. We want to leave this on a positive note, and we're about to tell you how you can get involved. Before we do, I am going to just mention that if you believe that the work that Sierra Club and Jess and all the other environmental groups are doing is deeply important and needs to be heard about, please donate to the show. Please spread the word on this podcast, forward it to your friends. We really, we do use the funds to make sure that with the graphics and the editing and everything is in place so that when we do our social media, when we do some of our advertising, it really reaches many, many more people. We know that you want to transform state politics, and we do it by getting people informed and engaged. And on that note, I really want to ask you, Jess, what actions people can do? How can they join in your work? And are there any specific things coming right up that you think people might be able to join in on?
Yeah, thanks, Anna, and thanks for the work that you do. It's incredibly important. So in terms of actions people can take, and to underscore your point, it can be joyful, and I think actually a more sustainable world, I think, is actually a better world. We're not just running away from things that are bad, we're building something that is going to be better than what currently exists. So
amen.
So exciting things as well. But first, let's stop expanding gas infrastructure, like I mentioned before. So
we'll put that link below.
Yeah, put that link in the notes, and it's bit.ly/gas in the past. I do encourage people. I said the wrong URL before. It's masstownsforclimate.org, not .com, to check out what their local community is doing. And I would say, like, follow environmental organizations in the state that seem exciting to you. Sierra Club is obviously one of them, but look to environmental organizations and particularly impacted communities that are talking about, they know what's happening in their community, and look to them to learn about what those things are and how you can support them, because so often people who are impacted are the ones who are hurt first and foremost in all of this. And so follow those organizations. I don't think there's a specific thing that people can do at the moment that I can think of, but I know that there will be a lot of opportunities in the upcoming months to be pushing this administration, and then to be pushing the legislature, and just pushing society at large to take the problems that Jordan very rightfully outlined seriously, and to treat them with the urgency that they deserve, because they are urgent.
I'll add some things for people to do. Make art. Make art about it. Encourage your kid to draw something fun. Teach them about it. Make a video on Instagram where you're just like, y'all get it together, and maybe that's it, right? Like, or tweet about it, or make a song about it, or whatever it is. If you knit, sit in a knitting community and talk about it a little bit, and like some of the things and why it's important, right? Like take it doesn't all the things that we do to move us forward on these issues aren't always like big ginormous, like you're going to solve it, you're going to come together with a plan on transportation. Like, you don't need to do that. You can do something fun and interesting, or encourage others to do fun and interesting things, because all of those things matter. right? They all get us towards the thing. They raise consciousness, they put pressure. They're all a part of it. And art and culture, they are as important, if not more important, than some of the other pieces we can and should be doing, because they are what drives sort of zeitgeist, what people think about, consider as important, and ultimately address.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jess. Thank you, everybody. We love being here, and we look forward to talking to you all next week. Hey there. Thanks so much for watching us on YouTube. Please like and subscribe. And it would be amazing if you would also subscribe to us on your favorite podcast player. Just look for Incorruptible Massachusetts wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks so much.